Welcome to the Lifestyle First podcast, discussing lifestyle medicine and making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1 question, 2 research reviews, and 3 actionable health tips, all centered around the Lifestyle First method, your blueprint for the 10 key routes of optimal health and happiness. And now your host, lifestyle medicine physician and coach, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 3. Today we are continuing to take a deep dive with my co-authors into the book, A Prescription for Healthy Living. And the theme in the Lifestyle First method today that we're exploring is F for food. And the one question we're discussing is fasting safe? And why should I try it? 2 references to support today's discussion are a 2019 paper by De Cabo, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this was looking at intermittent fasting, health, aging and disease, and a 2018 paper by Matson and his team looking at intermittent fasting and brain health. So today I have with me Dr. Ellen Fallows. Ellen is a long-standing GP partner of over 10 years, and she's currently lead for person-centered care with the Royal College of GPs, and she's also lead for virtual group clinics with NHS England. And on top of that, she's also delivering NHS programs to reverse high blood pressure and diabetes, and is working very closely with the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine in terms of setting up a learning platform. And when she's not doing all of that, well, she's busy with her children in her garden, trying to keep up with them. So welcome, Ellen. Really lovely to have you here on the show. I thought we would just dive in and just unravel this. Today, we're talking about fasting. So tell me, is it just a fad? There is a lot of science behind fasting. It's been around for centuries, hasn't it? Embedded into so many cultures. So fad or here to stay? What actually happens when we fast?
Well, I think certainly it's not a fad. As you say, it's been around for a very long time. And I think the most important concept to get across is just that it is safe, that we don't have to have this fear of missing a meal. So I think perhaps caveat that with clearly going without any food at all. Starvation, prolonged starvation is a bad idea. And we'll go into more detail maybe about that. But I think there is this fear in our culture of missing meals that's perhaps been driven by food companies and marketing campaigns, lock away hunger, you must have a breakfast before you go to school, this sort of thing. The idea that even I have with my own children, that they have to continuously snack. So I think, there's going from this current way of eating, sort of grazing on very high calorie but low nutrient dense foods all the time, and then looking back to how we perhaps used to eat and why that's changed, because I think we probably ate maybe 1 or 2 meals, often only in daylight, and had periods when we didn't or weren't able to access food, and then periods where we were able to eat a lot. And that's obviously radically changed with this sort of grazing habit. So I think not a fad. We should move away from this fear of having periods of time when we don't eat. And there's lots of growing evidence, but I have to caveat that again with the fact that quite a lot of it's in, animal studies, rodents and some primates. So it's still in the early days.
There's something about that abundance, isn't there? There's a sort of abundance of food around us now. So there is this sort of feeling that actually we've got to sort of utilize all of that all of the time. But our physiology hasn't quite caught up with that yet, has it? It's still in those ancestral days of, as you say, sort of hunting and foraging. And so we're really not designed physiologically to be eating all the way from the moment our eyes wake up in the morning and there's that call to have breakfast like a king, isn't there? And all the way to that sort of after dinner snack and those those habits, which I've certainly fallen prey to as well, of snacking in front of the TV or getting into bed with that bowl of fruit. And, all of that does is it continues to stimulate all your digestive processes. And we're really not designed like that, are we? But I think you're right. I think it is this thing about starvation versus fasting. And there's clearly a difference, isn't there? Because
Yeah.
starvation is very much about not having control over that. You don't have a choice. That's something that is imposed and inflicted by, perhaps environment more than anything else. Whereas fasting is very much about choice, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about exactly as you say, not continuously grazing, even though it's there. But we have to recognise that actually for some people it's a difficult choice to make. If you're facing difficult circumstances, stressful times, and we are all put in this obesogenic environment. I just remember back pre-lockdown and COVID, going on a train journey at it was 3 o'clock, so not a normal time for people to eat, but there were constant announcements describing in great detail the types of food that was available. They were constantly walking the food trolley back and forth so I could smell the donuts and the Krispy Kremes and the bacon, and then there was somebody sitting on the other side of me, and I'm pretty driven to try and stick to this stuff, but we only have a limited amount of reserve for self-control. And for those of us who are struggling at the moment with stress and trying to look after children, juggle work, it is very difficult. So we need to be calling for structures around us, our environment, to be changed to support us to do this thing that turns out was very important, which is not having periods of not eating. I think it's a bit like sleep and how we're waking up to how this period of not being awake is actually important. Just because we haven't studied it or considered it, this period of not eating is actually just as important, because we found that, or if you look at the literature and the research, that there are specific things that happen in our body, in our cells of our body, that are essential for health, and they only happen when we're not eating. And I like to think of it a bit like the analogy of what we all probably got up to, or some of us anyway, who were not on the front line during lockdown. That, when our cells are sort of locked down and not being fed, they are not able to grow and reproduce. They're not building proteins in our body. Therefore, they are able to do the sort of things that we pottered around doing, which was, throwing out the junk, maybe stocking up the wood pile, creating new mitochondria, our battery cells for our batteries for our cells, and throwing out cells which might become cancerous or faulty, for example, in dementia in our brain. So we see these processes that dampen down inflammation, that clear out things that we don't need. And if we don't allow our bodies to do this, then we're constantly stimulating growth factors like insulin, like growth factors, which we know are cancer promoters. We become chronically inflamed. And it's very interesting. There's some research and academics starting to write that we should look into fasting as an approach to reduce risk against COVID, because we know that coronavirus, when you get a pneumonia, the severe pneumonia with coronavirus, it tends to produce this inflammatory storm, this cytokine storm. And people are wondering that, when you fast and that the cytokines and the inflammation gets dampened down, and our immune system is, I wouldn't say boosted up, because clearly you don't want it to make an overreaction, but it's more honed. It may be more effective. It's very interesting. I mean, there's no evidence that one should fast when we have COVID, or any evidence yet that it might be protective, but it would be very interesting to see what research comes out of that.
Oh yeah, especially when you go down to what is actually happening at a physiological and biochemical level, and there seems to be, certainly logic there that needs to be played out in the real world, doesn't there, really? So, but I guess we are all fasting, aren't we? We all go to sleep, however long that may be for. We should be doing it for 8. Many of us are doing it for less, but certainly if we are sleeping for 8 hours, we're automatically fasting for 8 hours, aren't we? So, do we really need to be expanding that and prolonging that and increasing that fasting period beyond what is already sort of quite natural anyway, so long as we do sleep well?
Such a good point about sleep, and it's worth bringing the data on that in as well, because we know that although you say that we're having this maybe 8 to 10 hours of sleep, we're there's so much evidence that we're not. And it was so interesting. I think it was the CEO of Netflix saying their only competitor is sleep, and they think they're winning. And that actually many of us are cutting into our sleep time, and in that time, if we're awake, it's very tempting to go and open the fridge. And then of course there's people who are working shift patterns, particularly at the moment, long on calls for nursing colleagues, all our key workers. Being awake at night time, awake for longer, gives you more opportunity to eat, and eat when perhaps our body's not used to it. And we'll perhaps come on to this idea of time restricted feeding as well, and eating with our biological body rhythms, because that's again another big area.
Yeah, so let's move into that a little bit then. So when you talk about fasting, how are you referencing it? Because we hear of so many things, don't we, as you mentioned, sort of time restricted eating, or the 5-2 eating, or fast for 24 hours. And certainly, again, in many cultures, that idea of fasting for one day a week, every week, is quite the norm in many cultures. But when we are talking about fasting and actually beneficial fasting, what's the research telling us about actually what is helpful to us? Are there particular patterns that are better for us to follow through with, or is it really very much about, again, tuning into what feels right for you?
Well, I mean, I think the one of my big takeaway things from being a doctor myself and working with patients is that really whatever lifestyle change you're going to make, it needs to fit in with you. And this is what the whole person-centered care movement or idea is about, that if you're going to change something, it has to fit with you and what you're doing. And but that aside, if we look at the research, which again I should say is in its infancy, this is a very new area, so we don't have long-term trials or anything like that. But in the research, when they talk about fasting, they do really mean sort of liquids only, usually, and clear liquids. So we're talking about water or black tea, black coffee, though sometimes people are suggesting perhaps not even that. And then there's 3 different types of fasting when people look at it in the research, and that's alternate day fasting, periodic fasting, or time restricted feeding. So alternate day fasting is pretty obvious. So one day you don't eat, you just have fluids, the next you would eat. And then periodic fasting, people must have heard for 5-2 or 6-1, all this sort of thing. And then time restricted feeding is like you were talking about, trying to extend your nighttime fast. So having breakfast later and dinner earlier. And specifically, we're finding that, or the research is suggesting that it's the eating earlier is probably better for most people. Now, we do fall into those larks and owls categories, but even then it appears that it's better to be probably eating between 10 and 2 than it is, say, between 2 and 8 p.m. And it's certainly that eating just before bed that probably is not good, both because it of your biochemistry at that time, which means you're less able to manage things like glucose and fats, but also because it seems to disturb some of the rhythms of sleep that are really important for health later on. So looking at those 3 types of fasting, there's been some really interesting research in the past couple of years, specifically looking at that early time-restricted feeding. And although there was a very small trial, I think it was about 12 men, and it was for 5 weeks, these men had pre-diabetes, and they kept them very strictly controlled. So these were, I mean, it's small numbers because it's very expensive to do a piece of research like this. They were kept in a lab conditions, watched while they were eating, and they were given meals provided. And they were made sure that the meals had enough calories so they didn't lose weight, and that the calories were the same in the group who went through the early time restricted feeding, so they ate between 8 and 2, and the calories were the same in the meals for those who ate between 8 and 7 p.m. And the researchers wanted to ask, is it just the reduction in calories that we see in some fasting regimes that matter, or is it that there's something else about fasting? There's something else about this period when we're not eating. And lo and behold, those who were during the time when they were in this early time restricted feeding, they saw lower insulin levels. And insulin is this hormone that's released with high sugar, and it can be high for some people with type 2 diabetes. They also saw there was reduced oxidative stress. So there are markers of this sort of stress in the body that was reduced as well. And reduced levels of inflammation, and reduced cholesterol, reduced blood pressure, reduced heart rate in those people who had the same calories. They just ate them at a different time. So I think, it's a small study, early days, but that's really exciting to me.
No, absolutely. It's very interesting that you're highlighting this as sort of, human studies. There's certainly been a lot of that research done on mice that I'm very aware of, and particularly also related to weight gain. Feeding on the same number of calories, but eating those at different times can have quite a significant effect. So this is the first time I've heard about the human extrapolation of that, which, as you say, certainly needs to be broadened out beyond the 12 people for it to really sort of start to have effect. So you mentioned some benefits there in terms of why should we even be thinking about fasting, in terms of, so you've mentioned some good stuff. What are those benefits? Why are we even talking about fasting for longer periods than we're doing now? What are we looking to gain?
Well, I mean, the big headline stuff that's, I think, been seen throughout, non-human primates, so monkeys, rhesus monkeys, are very similar to us, as well as rodents who are less similar, obviously, is that you just live longer. And that's been seen throughout many different species. And then if you look at the different medical conditions, things like type 2 diabetes, it appears to improve a lot of the markers involved in type 2 diabetes. In that study on pre-diabetic men, it prevented progression, or we would suggest that it would prevent progression to type 2 diabetes. It appears that it may be protective against things like dementia and improve memory. They found in rodent models anyway that fasting stimulates the production of this chemical called brain-derived neurotropic factor. I've heard Merck and Moseley call it brain fertilizer. I love that. I think it stimulates, brain nervous neuron growth and protects your brain against, aging. And I think we're all worried about trying to reduce our risk of dementia. So there's promising evidence from animals that may be the case. And the same with cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and stroke risk. It reduces blood pressure and cholesterol, these things that we know are associated with greater risk of those conditions. And then weight loss, just as you said, it appears that actually the calorie you have at night or in the evening isn't as fattening as the calorie that you might eat in the morning. And very excitingly, fasting seems to do this crazy thing to our fat cells. It's called browning, and these brown fat cells do this thing called non-shivering thermogenesis, i.e. they just burn energy without you having to move. So it just helps you lose weight. And actually we thought that only babies had this sort of heat producing fat, but it's not true. Adults have it, and you can reawaken your sort of fat burning fat cells, which seems like a win-win. And the other big win for people wanting to lose weight by using some of these fasting regimes, intermittent fasting regimes, are this idea that we burn glucose, we use glucose or sugar as a fuel when we're eating, but when we're not eating, we break down our fat to produce ketones. And there's something quite specific about ketones that seems to be helping people to lose weight, and that is that it seems to suppress appetite. And that, I think, really, really helps when we're living in this environment that's loaded with all these treats, and it's very difficult to, say no and hold back. So that may be, it needs to be all untangled, doesn't it? But maybe one of the reasons why this can really help us to stick to our healthy eating New Year plans that we all have right now.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. There's so many systems at play when we eat, aren't there? There's the whole, as you say, the reward system going on, and you've got your homeostatic mechanisms going on, and it's sort of, trying to get those two matched up as well. So certainly sounds as though there's plenty of information out there about reasons for fasting in terms of survival and surviving well as well. So not just living longer, but living longer well as well. So is it fasting only for those groups of people that might already think they are or are at risk of Alzheimer's or diabetes or heart disease, or is fasting for everybody? Are there any special groups?
I think there are certainly special groups we should think about for whom fasting may not be as safe, or whom should really be having the support of their GP or hospital team, which at the moment is very hard to get. So I'm not suggesting that's a great idea to try and contact them and say, I think you should help me do some fasting, because right now I think they're pretty busy. But if you were thinking about it, you may want to touch base with them when things quieten down. And the specific groups that I really worry about in the programs that I've supervised, for example, with the total diet replacement and in sort of quite radical lifestyle change programs, are children. So children should not be encouraged to fast. I do think we should think about reducing snacking, but that we shouldn't be encouraging fasting. They are growing, and there's no data in that age group that I'm aware of to suggest any of this. Intermittent fasting for children, pregnant women, and breastfeeding. Obviously, the nutritional requirements are quite complicated, and it's we don't want to cause problems for them. Same with the very elderly. But I think if you're not in those groups, then specific things that I get concerned about are those who are on many medications for things like blood pressure and diabetes, particularly those medications which can make your blood sugar go low. So we're talking about insulin, glycoside, and gliflozins for different reasons. And that can actually be quite complicated. And we cannot stress enough that low blood sugar can cause you to die immediately. So it can be a very serious risk for people. That's not to say, though, if, like some of my patients that I've heard in the past, when you really, really listen and ask them what they're doing with their food, some people are, I've had a chap who woke himself up in the night to eat biscuits because he was so worried about his insulin and hypos. If you are feeding your medications, particularly with junk food, please then do talk to somebody, your doctor about that, or your nurse about that, because that you can get into this crazy situation where as Professor Roy Taylor says, type 2 diabetes is chronic food poisoning. It is about food for a lot of people. If you're feeding your medications, we've got into a pickle. We can untangle that. You may not need some of your medications so that you don't have to force yourself to have a breakfast. If you're not somebody who would normally want to eat breakfast, but you're having to take it for medications, there may be a way around that. But don't, if you're on type 2 diabetic with insulin, for goodness sake, you must not just go into fasting without discussing it with your doctor. I think that's really important to say. There are other medications as well that actually, if you do rapidly lose weight or change what you eat quite radically, warfarin, the blood thinner, is one of them, that can actually really affect. Lithium's another, some of the medications you're on. So if you're on medications, you really must talk to your doctor about it.
Let me pick up then on what you mentioned about children, because we do form our habits as adults as children, don't we? So a lot of our relationships or associations with food do come from our childhood, for sure. And so those habits, for example, of eating late into the night or foraging for that snack after you've just had dinner, what do you feel about that? I mean, you may not want to label it as fasting and more about sort of healthy eating habits, but when you say children shouldn't be fasting, you're referencing sort of that prolonging that nighttime fast, or agreed, absolutely we shouldn't be having a day when they're not eating and prolonged fast, but that idea of not eating right up until bedtime and starting right from the beginning of the day, is that the sort of very healthy approach to fitting in with sort of natural body rhythms and eating in tune with your royal circadian clock and your natural rhythms that we can start to instill from childhood, do you think?
I think you hit upon a really important point, and I know that all the obesity research is certainly looking at children. Childhood is the place to start, and schools are where you can get a lot of that work in. And actually, school meal patterns, say 4 o'clock for sort of getting home for 4 and having breakfast at school for some children, can actually instill quite a nice routine that's better than some adults who come home and eat at 8 p.m. or something like that. But what's interesting is the snack culture in school. That I don't know about you, but I do not remember having snacks at school. It just wasn't a thing. We had Maggie Thatcher's milk, but that was it. But in my children's school, despite my best, and I, get this terrible reputation as this mother who wants to take away the treats, but they have a small mid-morning snack and a mid-afternoon snack in my kids' school, and they are quite often biscuits.
Yeah, no.
And I think there's this idea that children can't exercise without biscuits, and that they won't concentrate. And in fact, some of the research suggests the total opposite, that when you're having very high swinging glucose and insulin levels, that children's behavior in the classroom is worse, and that their IQ, their sort of performance is worse as well. So I would love to see Public Health England, schools really look at that research, and more research being done about, I think, particularly school performance and school and educational outcomes, because I think that might help engage parents and school governors, because that's what matters to them. It's teachers who want their children to sit and listen and be more manageable, and parents who want better outcomes, hopefully, from their kids. I think if we could get those messages more strongly across, that might help us, because the kind of conversations I've had have been very difficult. The parents fall into two camps: one that are very concerned and really want something done, and the others who feel very angry about the suggestion that we might be suggesting that children don't need 3 sugary treats already at school, pudding, 2 snacks.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I've seen vending machines in schools as well now, where it becomes, the place to go in the breaks as well. So again, it's that cultural element of schooling as well, that again you learn from your peers as well, don't you, as well. So no, fascinating stuff. Anything else about fasting that you want to kind of highlight for us?
No, I mean, I think it's worth saying there are some side effects. I mean, I've just for this podcast, I've missed my breakfast and I've missed my lunch, and I'm feeling hungry. So there is, and I'm a bit tired, and I'm probably a bit irritable. But I hope that hasn't come across. I'm not yet constipated. Who knows? But it's worth saying that it does matter what you eat when you do eat with fasting. Of course, I could just go and have a Big Mac now and some chips and think that would be all okay, but it particularly matters that you get enough fiber, because there's a gastrocolic reflex. That means if you eat, it stimulates your guts, and you can then go to the toilet more easily. So it's worth making sure that if you are fasting, you keep your fluids up, and then when you're eating, you're going to have to eat much more fiber. And I'm sure you've had other podcast guests who will talk a lot about nutrition, but there's definitely consensus around veg and fruit. There's a lot of nutrition wars on there, but there's nobody is saying that we shouldn't be eating more fruit and veg and fiber. And so if you can, any diet you pick that suits you and your lifestyle, it should be really full of those things. And if you're eating like that around when you're fasting, then you shouldn't run into trouble with constipation. And the other thing is protein. So there is a concern that with any sort of calorie restriction, whether you're dieting or fasting, that we don't want people to lose muscle mass. We want them to lose fat. And so, in the times that you're eating, again, it's to have enough protein, whether that's plant-based protein or you're choosing a meat and dairy protein, you'd need to make sure you're getting enough. But other than that, I think, there's definitely some key, 3 key things that you can take away. And one of the big takeaways is don't be frightened of hunger. It is good for us. Don't be frightened not to eat. That would be the big one.
Yeah, no, completely agree with that. And sometimes, you touched on we've talked about when to eat and when not to eat. That's the sort of whole conversation around fasting and timing. But as you say, equally, it's not just about when, it is about what. But the third thing is also about how. It is about how you're eating, because food is meant to also be that sensory experience of using your five senses, enjoying the experience of eating, as you say, not having fear as part of it is one aspect, but actually, that emotional enjoyment of what you are able to eat when you choose to eat. So I think that's a really important element to bring into relationship with food, and timing of food is also, making sure that you're making it and allowing it to be a pleasurable experience, not sort of breaking a fast and eating away without actually recognizing what you've chosen to eat and what that's actually giving you as well. All those sort of hunger signals and those fullness signals, they're there for us, aren't they? They're calling out to us to tune into. But when we're eating in front of the TV, we're distracted from what's going on with our body. When we're snacking on the way to picking up the kids from school, we're missing out on all those experiences as well, aren't we? So I think all those things really tie in.
Absolutely, and it's how my guiding principle for anything I do in the sort of under the umbrella term of lifestyle medicine is that it needs to be person-centered. It's about what's right for the person in front of you or yourself, and we mustn't forget, particularly with food, that it also has a great social and cultural meaning for people. And I just can't forget the crazy stats about how important social connection is, and that it's more important as a risk factor for more death and ill health. It's greater than our body mass index, so obesity and smoking combined. Feeling isolated, and if you're refusing to engage in a meal that's been prepared or eat with somebody, that's very isolating. If you're choosing to eat differently. So food is a way we share and show our sort of tribal values, So I do think that it's so important that, we're sensitive to how people might need to, particularly now when it's so hard to be, integrate socially and be around other people, that how important that is, and that we shouldn't get too bogged down with, specific dietary patterns or patterns of eating. If you've got a birthday party or celebrating something with your family or your friends, these things are really important for our health.
Yeah, no, completely with you. Food holds memories, doesn't it, for all of us? We all hark back to our mother's cooking. Well, unless you're my children, and my cooking's not that great as well. But we all have those memories of whether it was ice cream at the beach when we were kids, or all of those. And you're right, those are those associations which really give us that connection. And celebratory moments are celebratory moments, and those are so important to do collectively. Completely agree with you.
And now, here is your Lifestyle First prescription. Your 3 activating actions to take you from knowing to doing.
What can we do now in our lives in relation to sort of food and fasting? Have you got 3 actions that people can take away today?
I do, and I was trying to make them all start with the same letter. So I was thinking the 3 things are snack, swap, and squish. So the first thing is don't snack. I think it's really clear that, okay, you might not want to fast all day, you might not want to fast for 2 days, but just eat less often. It seems to be what's coming out of all of the research. We're eating too frequently and not just too much. So don't snack. And the other thing is swap. So, rather than, I think the message about 5 fruit and veg a day is people try and eat that on top of what they're already eating. But I think you have to swap it for something else and use them to fill you up. So on the days you do eat, nobody thinks that green leafy vegetable isn't amazing for your health, and beans. I think there's a lot of agreement that these, if you replaced processed food with the stuff that fills you up with less calories, so green leafy vegetables, beans, and you swap things like your sugar sweetened drinks or fizzy drinks, juice or milky drinks with water, black tea and coffee, that's really going to help you both lose weight and feel better. And the third thing is squish. So squish your eating window down. So have your breakfast later and have your dinner earlier. If you think that a 24-hour fast might not be possible. And I think there's some suggestion that some of us don't have great metabolic flexibility. So they're talking about this sort of ability to switch between different fuel types, and that some of us, and I think I count myself in this because I find fasting very, very difficult, that actually we may need to practice it. So you may need to just skip a meal, see how you go, skip another meal, then see if you can push it further and further and see how much you can tolerate. So start slowly if you need to.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love acronyms. If you hear any more of my podcast, wherever I am, I'm always dropping in acronyms. So that was absolutely great. Snack, swap, squish. Love that. And I think you're absolutely right. Whatever you're starting, to be able to feel successful at it, to feel that sustainability, you have to go slow. So even just moving your dinner by half an hour and doing that every day with consistency until it just feels like the most natural thing to do, and then move it an extra hour or an extra half an hour and keep shifting that until it continues to feel comfortable, and stop when it doesn't, because then you're pushing yourself where actually you're not going to be able to sustain what you're aiming to do. We tend to go at things all or nothing, don't we? We're running that marathon, but we actually haven't even got a pair of trainers yet. So I think, it's really important to sort of start slow and build up these sort of habits so that they become habits. It doesn't become about self-control and I will not eat, past 7 o'clock tonight. It's not about needing control all the time. It's about it starting to feel really natural. Actually, so I love that. Thank you for all those insights and those fantastic takeaways. I'm sure people will want to know more or come and find you or learn more about what you're doing. So where's the best place to channel into you, Ellen?
Well, we've obviously all contributed to this textbook edited by Dr. Emma Short that's called Lifestyle Medicine: A Prescription for Healthy Living, that has much more detail if you want to have a look at that. But also it's worth finding out more about the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. That's at www.bslm.org.uk. There's lots of information on there about our events, and hopefully soon lots of stuff coming out to educate not just patients, but doctors and clinicians as well, to make sure we can get out, this really exploding area of research in this area of, what we can do ourselves to help ourselves feel better. And I'm on the usual social media stuff under Ellen Fallows.
Perfect. I will share all of those links because I think they're all incredibly valuable and will have some great reach. So thank you so much. It's been really lovely chatting today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Alka.
Before I bring today's episode to a close, a reminder that the doors to the Lifestyle First Academy are opening this month. It is the key training platform to help you discover, notice and activate who you are, what you want and where you are going so that you can create a happy, healthy lifestyle. And my flagship course, Start Now, Transform Your Lifestyle to Transform Your Life, launches on the 24th of January. So join now with a special discount code JAN24. Just head over to my website, to the Academy page, and become a founder member to start your journey of transformation for 2021. It is time to live with intention. And I would, of course, love you to subscribe to this channel. The links are just below. So just subscribe and share so that you too can help spread messages of health that matter. Which now leaves me to simply wish you a happy, healthy day.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifestyle First podcast, making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and we'd love it if you'd be kind enough to leave a review. To learn more or to arrange a consultation, please visit www.dralkapatel.com. See you next time.